And thank you, everyone, for being here. This is our Lunch and Learn rescheduled, but also this semester we had been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the entire semester in Lunch and Learns. And it's okay, though, if you weren't able to make those Lunch and Learns, because this is still a standalone on its own. But because we had that emphasis, and today we had scheduled a Lunch and Learn anyway, we reached out to the Equity Committee and said, well, would we want to? I can, reschedule it if so. But everyone embraced the idea of having this Lunch and Learn on the Equity Summit Day. So we're really glad to be here for this very special Lunch and Learn that's also tied in with the Equity Summit. And if you have not had the opportunity to go to Lunch and Learns, by the way, my name is Laura Thompson, and I am with Carrie Ann Sparks. Wave, Carrie Ann. And we are the dynamic duo presenting Lunch and Learns for you this semester. But first, one of the things that we talked about in Lunch and Learn to help with diversity, equity, inclusion, to really put our students first, sometimes you have to also engage in self-care. So you have to take care of yourself before you can really serve other people well. So what we'd like you to do is take a little bit of a temperature here and talk to us about tomorrow is June. Can you believe it? Tomorrow is June. I have a senior in high school. I can't believe tomorrow is June. But what we'd like you to do is look at some of these pictures on the screen, decide which one might resonate with you. And you can write into the chat, maybe that adjective, that descriptive word that makes you think about how you feel that it is June. How do you feel that it's June? I can't believe that it's not going to be May anymore. Yes, a bit dumbfounded like that cow. Yeah. The glasses and the watermelon. I'm ready to go.
Happy it's summer. I can have ice cream every day, Erin says. Melinda says she's over it. A lot of people, the dog with the watermelon, which I don't know. I mean, I guess they're happy. I guess that is like signifying happy. Excited for change in the weather. Yes, it hasn't really been warm. So it will be nice to have some summer here and going to the beach. Oh, lots of people excited for the beach.
Carrie Ann, I don't see anyone who's sad though, who's sad to see May go. Everyone's kind of excited. Excellent. And several people are talking about beach time or being able to go on vacation that they're excited about as well. Okay, well, we will go ahead and move into this. The agenda for today's session, we're going to help kind of make sure that we all have an idea of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. Lovingly, it's reduced to DEI when we use the letters for it. So we might say DEI or might say diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we're going to make sure we have a good definition there. And then we're going to dive into diversity, we'll dive into equity, and we'll dive into inclusion. Interestingly enough, we know that all three of those things not only exist separately, but they are always interacting as well. So we'll talk about them discreetly, but we'll also talk about how those three concepts support each other. Carrie Ann, do you want to start off with what is diversity?
Sure. So I would say that in my lifetime, I was born in 1980. So for better or worse, there it is. And in my lifetime, I think the definition of diversity has changed and it has grown. And we've really, I hope, come to appreciate, why diversity is important. So when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about the fact that we notice differences, that we understand that people are unique and that we really want to celebrate that. And I think a good way to kind of appreciate why we want to strive for diversity is to think about if you were going to create a team. Let's say you wanted to make an app because you've decided you want to become a millionaire, right? Okay, so we're going to make an app, not TikTok or anything like that, maybe something a little more educational. And if you were to then put together a team to create your app, you probably wouldn't want to get all people that are exactly like you. Let's say you are really great at coding, okay? And so then if you were to create a team of everyone that's really great at coding, you don't have anyone to market your app. You don't have anyone to come up with a business plan. You don't have anyone to run the books. I don't know if anyone's ever tried an accounting class at Del Tech, but the books are complicated. So if you get to a team where everyone is the same, then you're really going to be limited and you're not going to be as successful. And so what diversity really is recognizing that we don't want a team where everyone is exactly the same. We want a team where people have a lot of different strengths. They have different backgrounds, different values, different communities. And so they can bring those things onto the team and make us, wildly successful. So that's really what diversity is. And hopefully that kind of helps you understand what we mean.
And there are some different categories, for lack of a better word, that we think of when we think about diversity. It's not just based on race. When we want diversity in that team, we want a whole set of diverse individuals. Go ahead and type in the chat real quick. What are some different kind of maybe identities to which you subscribe? So for instance, I'm a mom, right? I already told you that. I have a senior. I'm also an educator. I'm a teacher. I'm a singer. I am also an only child. I just turned 50 this month. Woohoo! Half Century Club. So there's lots of places where I identify. So where are some other areas that maybe we want to make sure we bring lots of people to the table? I see a mother, a veteran, an athlete. Thank you for your service, Lisa. Son, dad, husband, teacher. Father, Christian, adventurer, educator, daughter. Oh, I forgot I'm someone's daughter. I didn't say that necessarily. Mother of dogs, kids.
You are also a Midwesterner, Laura.
Oh, yes. Well, that's a big part of my identity. That's why I say hello to everyone, actually. Oh, Kendra identifies as a friend. I love that too. A concerned citizen. We're getting lots of good categories. A cat mom, cancer survivor. We're so glad, Celeste. And a foodie. I'm also a foodie. A New Yorker. New Englander, a graduate, camper, book lover, a redneck. A vegetarian.
Oh, vegetarian. Very nice.
Excellent. Delaware native. Oh, Corey, there aren't too many, are there? It seems like. Musician, a scout, a Delawarean. And then also some of the other areas of diversity that we think about beyond race are sometimes we do think about, as I mentioned, age, because we'll think that, maybe a particular position is more appropriate for a 20-year-old than it is for a 60-year-old, right? So we have to think about that ageism that maybe we have. We also have to think about abilities. So maybe it's someone who has a disability that could be a physical disability, or maybe it could be an expressive disability. There could be lots of different viewpoints that we could bring to the table. And it's important to be able to think about all of the stakeholders in the conversation. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Oh, I see an auto mechanic too. Ed, I might be calling you. Let's talk a little bit about equity also. A lot of times people will feel like equity and equality are interchangeable, but they're not. Equity is really talking about that fairness, that justness. You've probably had some conversations about that already today. Equality in this image, I love this image. Sarah Carter had used it in a presentation that we gave. At the top, if we give everyone the very same bike, it will fit people differently. Their experience with transportation will be different. And maybe some won't even be able to access it at all. But if we provide a mode of transportation that is equitable, then we can all move forward together. So this is one of the reasons I really like this bike. Again, it's the equity is that opportunity, having access to opportunities and thinking about what's fair, not just what's equal. And it's being able to help make sure that we can all have access to these things that it's just. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Carrie Ann?
No, I think you did a great. I do love this, I love this image as well, because it does really show that equity does not mean treating everyone exactly the same. Because we all are unique. We go back to that diversity. So, if we're going to recognize and we're going to celebrate diversity, then that has to not just be something that we say, right? But it has to be something that we do. Equity really is kind of the work of diversity, and looking at, if we have all different types of people, then we want to make sure that we have all different types of modes for people to access, whether it's education, transportation, or any other, resource.
Excellent. And then this one is, what is inclusion? Did you want to start with that, Carrie Ann?
Sure. So, when we think about inclusion, we really think about making everyone feel welcome. And I think, the several of the sessions today have already talked about that, providing an environment where people feel cared for, where people feel that they can be forgiven if they make a mistake. And also that, we want to make sure our students especially feel like they belong and feel welcome in our classrooms. And again, that may be a different, we may go back to equity and diversity and say that, one student may feel welcome already. They might not need us to do anything to make them feel welcome in a class, because they love being a student and they love school and they've had great experiences with it. But there are many other students who need some kind of conversation with us, or some feeling of connection with us in order to feel welcome. I had a student in my my psych course this semester who was non-traditional. She was in her 50s, and she said, she always felt like the old lady in the room. She wasn't, really feeling comfortable with the 20-year-olds, but she had so much knowledge and life experience that she could share. And I think as the semester went on, she appreciated that we, took advantage of that information. So, making sure that all of our students feel that they are really part of the community. And that comes from recognizing, all the diversity that we have, and making sure that we are, treating them equitably. And I know you have a great quote about inclusion. I don't know if you want to say that.
Yes, I really love this quote, that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being invited to dance, to actually participate in it. So it's also helping us move past just having people available, but it's really welcoming their voice and bringing their voice to the table. And I'd like you to recognize too that when we're talking about this so far, we really haven't said anything about disabilities. And inclusion, most often we think about disabilities. We think about the special education side of it, but really that's important. And we're not minimizing that at all, because we want to make sure. But one of the things that we also want to do is make sure that we are actually including everyone in this conversation. And the way that that's done most often is through, for instance, accommodations. But I think we've had these conversations like this before, but it's worth repeating. When we have a video that has closed captions, for instance, we make it available for students who have hearing disabilities, right? But we also make it available for students who are language learners, because now they can actually see those words. When we give them a transcript, they have time to look them up too, so they can understand what is going on inside of this video. They also have the visual cues, depending upon the video, that might help them to understand the meanings of the words. When we provide those closed captions, we also help that parent who is studying at 1 a.m. Their kids are sleeping, they can't have any noise, but they still want to be able to learn, and that's when they can do it. So we're recognizing that when we do something to help invite one group of people to the table, we might be making it easier for more groups to come to the table as well. So those are the thoughts behind inclusion. We don't really know how far our stretch can go, and we can sometimes be amazed and excited about how far we can reach. All right, so we'll get into the topic of today. So we really want to be able to be self-reflective, and how are we meeting our DEI, our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And we want to be able to think about our classrooms or our practices. Now, I found a document that has competencies in it. It was based in the medical world to help physicians move from kind of their residency to being a highly practiced individual who's integrating all of these things to encourage diversity, equity, and inclusive practices. But there are so many of the concepts that were applicable to education that I used it as a foundation for the conversation. But you might notice, if you look at the original document that talks about students, for instance, or healthcare, that I've changed those words a bit to, I'm sorry, it talked about patients or healthcare. I changed it to students in education. So you'll recognize kind of that difference, because some of the concepts really are applicable in our classrooms. So again, we talked about what is diversity. Diversity is really talking about our identities. And just to make sure that we've discussed those, it's race, it's gender, maybe our sexual orientation, the class we belong to, our country of origin, or where we come from, your education, religion, geography, any physical or cognitive abilities that you might have, and several other characteristics that form the foundation for diversity. So these are some examples from the document, again, modified for our purposes. But we have beginning at the beginning level, kind of at the very beginning, we have reflections on one's own identities and biases. So we started that a little bit today. People were typing in the chat, okay, here's some of my identities. We didn't ask you to report your biases. We're not going to do that. That is a personal process. But being able to kind of think about, for instance, for me, I know sometimes I might feel a little tense if it's dark at night and I see someone coming at me in a hoodie. I really shouldn't have any bias against someone in a hoodie, but sometimes that just makes me feel a little bit nervous. And that's just because of my society where I've been raised, but I now finally have a hoodie. So I think they're less scary, but it's the way that it works for that. And at the beginning level, you're recognizing those kinds of things. When you start into the practicing level, which is a little bit more advanced, that's when you're mitigating those personal biases. So you recognize that they exist. You recognize that you have certain identities, but now you're trying to figure out, okay, so how do I make sure that my instructional decisions are not affected by that? And this is also, we're not saying that there would be any, say, racism or discrimination based upon your identities or biases. It's recognizing if, for instance, your identity or your bias influences you, that maybe the text that you're using in your classroom tends towards, for instance, Carrie Ann and I have talked about old dead white guys, in English class or something like that. It's just recognizing that, oh, well, I'm deeply immersed in English, in literature, and these are all of the examples I've had in my life. So those are the ones I want to give to my students. But it's being able to recognize maybe there's some new examples out there that help recognize different kinds of people, or so that our students can be seen, they can see themselves in the work that they're doing. And then you'll often see in these examples, the advanced side is acting as a role model. So you've become so good at those beginning and practicing levels that now you can teach other people how to do it, or they can look to you for advice or as an example. So you'll see that most of those advanced ones are about being role models. Just to go back to the beginning for one more bit here, you want to be able to incorporate dimensions of diversity into instructional practices at that beginning level. So you may or may not have noticed that a couple of the images that I used in this presentation, I was very purposeful, trying to make sure that I had different faces represented. You might also be very purposeful of the text. So you're trying to make sure that any scientists that you're looking at their research, that they're representative of a variety of individuals from different backgrounds, different countries, different races, different genders or sexual identities. That's that basic level of being able to have that awareness. But to move to the next level is when you start to have conversations with students, and these can be tricky. So you want to develop that safe space in your classroom. And we have lots of resources. Contact us at CCIT. We can help you with that if you need some support. But you want to engage in conversations with students to help understand the diversity within your classroom so that you can meet the needs of the cohort in front of you. And then also being able to understand kind of at that beginning level, well, yeah, we're all different. We all identify in different ways. And that might affect student experiences. Either, as Carrie Ann said, they're privileged. They walk in, they're like, hey, I know what school is like. I'm very comfortable at school. Or oppression. Oh my gosh, I haven't had a lot of positive experiences. I'm not sure what this one will be like. And then when you're practicing, you're applying that understanding in your instructional planning. So really recognizing that intersection, and now you're being purposeful in your instructional planning, how you're going to handle that. So what we'd like to do is pause for a moment, because we spent a lot of time kind of talking. We talked about what's diversity, equity, inclusion, and now we really dove into diversity. I want you to think about where your practice is now, but you don't have to tell us. That's a very personal thing. That's the reflection part of it. But we are very interested in knowing, are there any ideas that you have that you're kind of inspired to try from your conversation, not just from this session, but in your conversation from today, from yesterday, from the PD sessions? Or do you have any questions that we could try to address for you? So take just a moment, go ahead and type into the chat, or feel free to unmute any ideas that you have that can help facilitate diversity.
Okay. Yes, don't assume anything about students. And that has come up a couple of times today, that, if we have, assumptions about our students, then it can really color the way that we treat them. It can color the way that they feel about us. So, talking with your students, getting to know them, asking them questions, and letting them, get to know you, because they probably have some assumptions about us as well. And, it can be really helpful when we can break down those, assumptions that we all have about each other. That can help with communication and certainly, increase learning.
And I see your comment about pre-class surveys. It's nice. You can do that right in D2L, and you can determine if anonymity is the best way to go. So you can just kind of gather general information about the course or about your cohort, or if you want to be able to collect that name information. Another way, though, you could present it as anonymous and then have a question on there that if they'd like to provide their name, they could. So then you could satisfy kind of both sides there too.
And Tom's comment, think more about what I say or do and how it can affect others. Does it create distance or inclusion? Yes. And that's, I think that's important for all of us working at Del Tech. Whatever our role is, that, we always, if a student is brave enough to come to any of us with a question, we always want to make them feel good about that question. Michelle Keenan in her presentation said she always answers emails from students with the first line is, "Thank you for contacting me." And I think we always want students to feel, that we are happy to help them, because so many students are afraid to reach out. And so allowing them to feel like this is a good thing will encourage them.
That brings up an interesting point, Carrie Ann, because I like that. I like that. Thank you for contacting me. And maybe that's a good approach, because so often, the students are like, hey, and that gets under the skin of, most of us. I know me and some of my colleagues talk about it. And so you find like you're almost trying to, take it as a teachable moment. And then there's like things get lost in emails. So that part. But what I was going to say about the inclusion, I'm glad that Tom said that, is so hard for so many years. You say things, and now you're learning that you probably have been offending people all along the way by saying, hey, guys, right, in general in class, or, ladies, and that's not how people want to be referred. So I think it's, can be difficult. Doing those pre-class surveys are great, but people aren't always forthcoming about how their pronouns, and now it's a struggle. You're in class and you're trying to have a normal flow, but in your mind, you're like, I don't want to step on toes. So I think any type of help or, bit tidbits people can give, I welcome them.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I agree. Laura, and actually, I had a great conversation yesterday about graduations. And one of the things we talked about is the good job Del Tech does with graduations, where, for example, all students wear the same graduation gowns. We don't kind of force our students to identify their gender in their graduation gowns. We don't tell students they have to wear a white dress. I mean, I know many of us, if you graduate from Delaware High School, you probably had to wear a white dress under your graduation gown and white shoes. And we had to go out and buy those and never wore them again. Laura mentioned that her son is being required to wear dress shoes for his graduation, even though as a 17-year-old, he doesn't really have use for dress shoes. So that's money that the family has to, put out that maybe they can or cannot afford. And so I think, and no one really, this is not a thing that we really have thought about before, maybe. But now schools are starting to think, hey, maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe we just say everyone wears the same gown and you can wear whatever clothes you want underneath. And if your family wants to scream loud when they hear your name, then that's okay. We want to make graduation inclusive, right? And celebrate diversity. And I loved I'm at Georgetown. I love seeing all the students with their different ways that they decorated their caps and the ways they did their hair and the way they just showed how proud they were. So, and yep, I see this, it's graduation in Georgia, boys wore, red, girls white. And Holly's saying, language is so powerful and often has different connotations for various people. Right. And to just learn about those things and do better, we're all educators and appreciate that we're all still learning. We don't know everything. So I think it's helpful to understand that we can learn, and when someone tells us something, then we take that and we, I think the speaker this morning was saying, if someone says, as I'm talking a lot now, if someone says to you, hey, Carrie Ann, you're really dominating this conversation, that I take that personally and I really think about that. And then I do better next time.
Well, thank you for that conversation about diversity. Let's talk a little bit about equity. Equity, again, just to remind us, it refers to fairness. It's not the same as equality. Equality means that everybody gets the same things, but equity is really thinking about our access to opportunities, housing, equipment. We want to be fair. We want to be just in that. And it's that work to overcome those intentional barriers, right? But sometimes there are unintentional barriers as well. Carrie Ann and I were talking about this, and this speaks a little bit to the assumptions that Michael was talking about. That, for instance, I've seen it happen that for a girl in a science class, someone might act surprised that she knows about thermodynamics, but they didn't really mean anything by it. But that probably is a little bit of an unintentional thing or a little bit of an implicit bias that's inside of them that girls don't, their experience has been that girls don't know that. So they think girls don't know that, but they're finding the exception to those experiences. And the idea is as we grow that we recognize those opportunities to kind of break the mold and to realize that it is different than we thought.
And I think Del Tech, we talked about equity, in terms of during COVID. During COVID, we had some students that were able to go to their very quiet bedroom and they had a laptop set up and Wi-Fi and they were just ready to go and do their courses online. And then we had other students that were at work and they were trying to write papers on their phones. And, I think a great thing about Del Tech is we recognized that and said, hey, you know what, we need to figure out a way to provide technology to students. And we have this great laptop lending program that then allows students to have that, to have that same tool as their classmate. So I think those too, when we provide those opportunities, when we identify that need, and then we say, here's what we can do to make sure that that student can have the same opportunities, is a good example of how we can kind of advance equity.
And Carrie Ann will go ahead and for this also, she will give you the link to this presentation so that you'll be able to see these examples again, to be able to review the examples again. And I'll just touch on a couple of them here, or a couple of the concepts really here. One of the ideas between this, let's look at the beginning one. And even though equity isn't always just racial based, inside of the model document that I used, it was talking about, for instance, any kind of racism or oppression from the past that affected trust, and I changed it to education. So recognizing how that might have happened, what were some of the things that went into it, and how far are we trying to come from there? That's the beginning level, is recognizing that it existed, right? And that we're trying to address it. But then in the practicing level, kind of the next, is working to identify those impacts, that those impacts that are far reaching from behaviors that were done before we were born, and how that can be still reaching now, so that we're recognizing it and working to correct those system level strategies. So this was one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this one, is it's not just identifying them, but now it's being more of an activist to try to help make a difference so that we are overcoming those impacts to the best of our abilities as we're moving forward. And again, you'll see being able to act as that role model is the advanced level for this, to help others recognize that racism or oppression, and to help others in their work towards addressing those system level strategies. So that's part of what we get into with the equity, is, again, some of these system level strategies, they've been built, they might be old, and they need revisions. So that's why we're really looking at that language and looking at the connotations of what was said, so that we can make good strides.
And I think a great example of that is looking at the use of standardized test scores. So we know that things like the SATs and the ACTs privilege students who come from, higher socioeconomic backgrounds, typically white or Asian students, are privileged in those, in those exams. And so colleges have really started to look and say, do we need to use the SATs and ACTs to determine, if a student can come to our institution or not? That kind of one example where we're saying, this tool, it's been used, but we know it's not an equitable tool. So should we continue to use that going forward?
So just to think about, again, where's your practice now that's introspective, and that's to help you kind of look inside and see how you're doing in your educational practice or in your life. But have you had any inspiration, or do you have questions about equitable practices that you think are ones that we should definitely highlight? Anything in life from this morning or from yesterday or anytime, things that you're trying already that you're particularly proud of and want to share? Mm-hmm.
I know something I've talked about with some of the people that are on this meeting is for instructors is doing away with late penalties for work. So, for students, there are a myriad reasons why they might need to turn something in late. And, if you have a policy where a student has to ask permission first, or they have to give you a reason, it really puts an onus on students, and oftentimes that is an inequitable onus. So I know that there are a lot of instructors that say, just turn in the work. You turn in the work, I will grade it. I want you to be successful. I understand that sometimes things happen. Some of our students are, are dealing with more than others. Let's put it that way. Some of our students are dealing with more than others. And so, let's just be, as fair as possible to say that your situation might be a little harder. And so rather than have to judge each time a student contacts you to think, is it reasonable for them to turn in something late, to say, you know what, you turn in the work, I will grade it. And that's kind of the end of the discussion.
And Tom had pointed out again about assumptions, being able, working to avoid assumptions about where people are coming from, what experiences they've had. Just because they're a mom, it doesn't mean their mom experiences were the same as my mom experiences, for instance, or just because we're similar ages, there's not that assumption, or just because they're only 20, they're only 20, they don't know anything. Not to make those assumptions, right? That we're giving people kind of that equal chance. We're giving them that equitable chance so that we can communicate. Terrific. We'll talk about inclusion again. Inclusion is not just related to the accommodations that we need, although that is one way to address inclusion, but it's also a sense of belonging so that our identities are accepted, our authentic selves are accepted. And that can mean a lot of things, but this is helping to know that we have environments where student skills are accepted, or that we are encouraging that collaboration, that flexibility, and that fairness. Mm-hmm. To look at some examples here, particularly, there are good ones in here about thinking about demonstrating courage, self-advocacy, and acts as an ally in situations of microaggression, discriminations, or racism. So these are looking at those opportunities that to start recognizing if there are microaggressions. Microaggressions are little, they're micro because it's little, but I think they add up and they become big. But they're the little things that can be seen as aggressive. They're not as overt as other actions, right? But discriminations or racisms, those are tended to be seen as more purposeful, whereas maybe a microaggression might be unintended, but is recognizing your words and the power that they have, that Holly pointed out. But then I thought this was interesting. I've heard this word upstander, but when I was talking with Carrie Ann, she hadn't heard the word before. So I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. Have you heard of someone being an upstanding citizen, right? So the word has been kind of appropriated for this, but it's being an upstander in a situation. So you stand up for someone. So, and sometimes that can be, someone, hey, don't treat my friend that way, but it might be you're kind of a bystander in a situation and you turn yourself into an upstander. So you step up and you are actively working to address injustices that you see in the world. And then one of the things that I want to be able to point out, the bottom one, the advanced, these other ones are acting as role models. This bottom one is really creating opportunities and environments for individuals who have differences in abilities or in education to be able to access education and eliminate those exclusive practices that happen and to encourage those inclusive. So that's the one that's a little bit different, where you're really being active to make it happen, whereas you might be able to identify it at the beginning and the practice you're trying to make it work. Now in the advanced, you're still a role model, but the wording was slightly different there. So I think you recognize a pattern, right? This is your opportunity to be introspective. Think about your practice with inclusion. Do you have anything that maybe it's an unintended implicit bias that you have, or maybe you've accidentally excluded a group because, for instance, I know that one of my icebreaker activities, you had to stand up. Well, if you can't stand up, how did I modify it so that everyone could participate? So it's even little things like that where you go, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I excluded someone. So thinking about that, do you have questions about inclusion, or do you have any practices that you engage in that you're proud of or that you'd like to try? Can you go ahead and type something in the chat for us or unmute?
So I do, hi you guys, my name is Corey Priest. I am on a DEI committee, Delaware Tech's DEI committee. And when I'm thinking about inclusion, I thought it was a powerful message that Delaware Tech, as an alumni, graduated from Delaware Tech, but also to have someone from the outside be a part of the DEI committee that's directly entrenched in our community. I work for the Delaware Department of Justice as a community engagement program administrator,
Awesome.
And so I went to, and I'm on their DEI committee at the Department of Justice in our office. And so I wanted to get more involved into the inner workings of Delaware Tech as an alumni and as a proud alumni of Delaware Tech. And so Dr. Brainerd and others felt it was a huge need to have someone from the outside join this DEI committee. And I thought it was important to have someone from the outside and not an administrator of Delaware Tech or a faculty member or a student, but someone that can give a different perspective. So, so when I'm thinking about inclusion, I thought Delaware Tech's ability to bring me on someone from the outside to come inside and listen to the students and faculty pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I thought it was powerful.
Absolutely. And I think that's amazing because, sometimes we're all in our little bubble here and we don't always see the things, just because this is how it's done, right? So we don't always see the things that could be hurtful or just the things that could be changed and improved. So
Yeah.
I didn't know. I don't know if everyone knew that we had, community members on the DEI committee, but I think that's wonderful. And I'm so appreciative that you are willing to give your time, and help us do better because, I think that's the goal for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Carrie Ann, because I surely unmuted because Corey had no idea. I know you were a recipient of our recognition for Black History Month, and I've met you before, A.D. Shea, at his retirement, so I'm familiar with you. But see, that's part of the problem, right? How come as a community we don't know that there are that's part of the problem right here at Del Tech with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Only a pocket of people know when everyone should know. We all should know that. And if you're someone that we can tap into, we should know that because you probably would bring a different perspective to those of us that feel like we don't get what we need from Del Tech. So thank you so much for sharing that. And maybe you can bring that back, that's a concern that how come we don't know that? So thank you, Corey.
So to their credit, I'm only like 2 weeks in. So
okay.
So Corey, lead with that, Corey. Lead with that, Corey.
Got you.
So we're on the leading edge now.
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I'm so glad that we're being so inclusive with voices at the table, lots of voices at the table.
And I think one thing that we don't always think about with inclusion too is just when it gets to scheduling things, right? I think about the schools that our kids go to here in Delaware. And, a lot of times things are scheduled in a way that maybe is not great for working parents or not great for parents that have younger kids at home and can't bring them. Or, if I had a student this semester who celebrated Ramadan. And so he was fasting and was having a hard time keeping up with our schedule. When we want to think about, we live in a very diverse society and we want to make sure that we, when we schedule things, when we set due dates, deadlines, all of that stuff, meetings, that we make sure to think about not just our own schedules, but, the schedules of all the people that we hope are going to be able to attend.
Excellent. And then to kind of give us a little bit of a summary of what's going on. Oh, thank you, Corey. We do have contact information now, Dr. Lancaster. It's in there. To come to the summary, we do have a Padlet that we can go to. I just dropped the link into the chat, and we're trying to be able to think about any strategies that you have to be able to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in your classroom or in your practice, because I know that we are all related to the college here, but we might not all be instructors. But how can you support diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts this summer or in the fall, whichever is an appropriate time of conversation for you. So if you can go ahead and pop over to that Padlet, and I'll drop it in one more time again so that it's right there for you. Please go ahead and pop over there and give us your input so that we can have a nice place for that. And I will bring it up so that we can see it.
And you can post a comment by, you'll see on the bottom right corner, there's a maroon plus sign, or a maroon circle with a white plus sign in there. And if you click on that, it will open up and you can then add a comment.
So if you haven't used Padlets before, they are very useful in your classroom to be able to collect some information and be able to get some basic concepts from students. You can use it in a variety of ways. We do have a resource that is also a Padlet reference guide that CCIT has created. So if you like this idea and you're like, how can I use this? We've got some ideas for you there too. And I think I gave you that link to Carrie Ann to be able to pop in there. I think she's typing her thoughts though for the tablet. She says, Laura, stop talking to me. I can't type. But yes, you just click the little button in the corner. Nice. As students verbally and in writing, what can I do to help them feel included? Very nice. And again, it can be anonymous. In D2L, you can provide anonymous surveys. Provide positive reinforcement, positive attitude. You can use those DEI metrics that we learned about today in some other sessions. Always think of the class as needing different things.
And always new stuff, right? There's always a new kind of, thing that comes along, right? And so kind of I think being willing to learn and change is really important and grow.
I like this one that talks about show that you care. Students know if you're fake. So, I mean, it's true. You do have to care because you don't just want to go through the motions. You want to have
students really appreciate that above anything else. If you go into a room and you know that the person there in the front cares about you, that's they're going to want to come to class because they know that you care about them. And if they feel like you don't care, I know that was said in one of the other sessions, if students feel like you don't care if they're there, then they won't come.
Right. We did want to say that in summary, when you're looking at your competencies in diversity, equity, and inclusion, the first thing you do really is examine yourself. That's kind of that beginning level. What are your own biases? How does that influence your instructional choices? How might it influence it? And then the second level is really making that effort, trying some things. Be transparent with your students. Tell them, I am trying to make efforts here to help with the diversity, equity, inclusion in my classroom. What ideas can I do to help you? Or what other types of scientists would you like to see? Whatever level it is. And then being able to rate your own progress. Again, that's a personal thing. We're not asking for those results from you. I want you to just be introspective today and really think about how you can continually grow as an educator who can support your students through diversity, equity, and inclusive efforts. Okay. And
we've got to let you go so you can get back to the closing ceremony of the Olympics here today. But thank you so much for all of you. And thank you all for being vulnerable and participating. It really is important and it really makes a difference.
Thank you for coming today.